Till after centuries of use in America there was an international effort to ban sign language. Educators from Europe wanted to force the deaf to try to focus on oral communication instead. Linguists rejected American Sign Language as a language until William Stokely proved it a grammar in the 1960s. Yeah, I become a teacher for deaf children and I can confirm it. There has also been some kind of war between the oral way and the sign language way, French and German way. They used to force deaf children to place their hands on the desk or tie them up. Also, they slapped them when they tried to sign. Thankfully we are now in the so-called bimodular bilingual way, which means teacher use sign language and verbal language equal parts. That being said, that only works well if you have 2 teachers per class, one who uses sign and one who uses verbal language. Sign language was only recognized as a language in my country in the last 10 to 20 years. When I took sign language classes, I had a meeting with a professor who was deaf outside of class. Long story. She started asking me questions verbally, which I tried to answer by signing. Thankfully one of her first questions was if I wanted an interpreter, which I tried to schedule days in advance, but I was told none were available. Though when the professor requested they were available, there was a manufactured controversy 15 years ago, about how the US national anthem shouldn't be sung in any language besides English. This was targeted towards Spanish as part of an anti-immigration push, but it made me so frustrated at the time, in part because the anthem is already regularly sung in a different language. ASL is a full-fledged language, and I think it's only tangentially related to English, being primarily symbolic as opposed to phonetic language. In my country sign language is now an official language, which of course is great. But there are many people who can't talk with their mouths due to another disability which also prevents them using sign language, who can point to letters on a board to spell words. An assistant writes down the letters as they point. Our so-called experts refuse to accept this as a valid way to communicate. The struggle is not over. One of the largest proponents of oralism was Alexander Graham Bell, of all people. He dedicated a significant amount of time and money into oralist deaf education. Disability History Museum. This is a great link that goes over the struggles people with disability face, including that the deaf community. Definitely check out the works of Horace Mann with his idea of the common school. Sign language also varies from country to country. The 2 most common are British Sign Language and American Sign Language, but most countries have their own dialect, while also borrowing from British and American. What does it mean? Proved it as grammar. As far as I know, sign language was an artificial language made on a template of existing language. Why shouldn't it have grammar if it is meant to convey the same message? The UK had a similar thing, focusing on lip reading and finger spelling rather than speech. BSL wasn't accepted as a language in its own right until 2003. It still isn't an official language. People in Europe used to hit left-handed kids with a stick in schools until they fixed it and they started writing with the right hand. So yeah, this doesn't surprise me one bit. It might have something to do with the fact that Native Americans had an almost universal sign language that could transcend their language limitations. Weird thread title: Dunking on Europe. American Sign Language comes from France, where French Sign Language was developed in the 18th century. People in Europe used to hit left-handed kids with a stick in schools until they fixed it and they started writing with the right hand. Weird title: Trying to dunk on Europeans, considering American Sign Language was invented by the French and just adopted by the Americans. Europeans wanted deaf people to learn oral communication? Sure, might as well force a guy with no hands to type while you're at it. I can't even wrap my head around this. This is go to the gym and get taller levels of stupid. Left-handed people used to be forced to learn with their right hand until the 60s too. Funny how those who claim they could hear, for a time, were too stubborn to listen. Father of communication Alexander Graham Bell was against ASL as well. Can you imagine being the guy that's "fuck you deaf people, just listen"? Ironically, the petition to recognize sign language fell on deaf ears.